Welcome to our second podcast on the Constitution. In this podcast, we have two learning objectives. The first learning objective deals with making a constitution, the Philadelphia Convention. The learning objective is as follows. Describe the delegates to the Constitutional Convention and the core ideas they shared. The second learning objective deals with the critical issues at the convention. The learning objective is categorize the issues at the Constitutional Convention and outline the resolutions reached on each type of issue. Let's begin. It is essential to describe the delegates to the Constitutional Convention and the core ideas they shared. Delegates were given specific instructions to meet for the sole and expressed purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation. Amendment was not feasible since amending the Articles required the unanimous consent of the states. 12 states sent representatives. Rhode Island refused to participate. The 55 delegates ignored their instructions and began writing a new constitution. James Madison, who is often called the father of the U.S. Constitution, was perhaps the most influential member of the convention in translating political philosophy into government architecture. A select group of economic and political notables attended. Men of wealth. Many were college graduates. Most were coastal residents. A significant number were urbanites. Philosophy into action. Although very different philosophical views were represented, the group agreed on questions of human nature, the causes of political conflict, and the object and nature of a republican government. Human nature first, let's look at. The delegates were united in their belief that people were self-interested and that government should play a key role in checking and containing the natural self-interest of people. Now let's look at political conflict. Madison believed that the distribution of wealth, i.e. property, is the source of political conflict. Madison claimed that factions arise from unequal distribution of wealth. One faction is the majority, composed of the many who have little or no property. The other faction is the minority, composed of the few who hold wealth. The delegates believed that either a majority or a minority faction will be tyrannical if it goes unchecked and has too much power. Let's now look at objects of government. Property must be protected against the tyrannical tendencies of faction. Nature of government. The secret of good government is balanced government, because as long as no faction could seize complete control of government, tyranny could be avoided. There were three major types of issues at the Constitutional Convention, and the U.S. Constitution resolved these issues. Although the Constitution is silent on equality, some of the most important issues on the policy agenda at Philadelphia concerned equality, representation of the states, what to do about slavery, and whether or not to ensure political equality. The equality issues. Equality and representation of states. The New Jersey Plan was proposed by William Paterson of New Jersey. The New Jersey Plan, or Small States Plan, called for each state to be equally represented in the new Congress. The Virginia Plan, suggested by Edmund Randolph of Virginia, called for representation in Congress based on the state's share of the American population. The Virginia Plan is also known as the Large States Plan. A compromise was developed, and it's known as the Connecticut Compromise because it was devised by Roger Sherman and William Johnson of Connecticut. The Connecticut Compromise, or Great Compromise, was the solution adopted by the delegates that created a bicameral, or two-house, legislature in which the Senate would have 2 members from each state, and the House of Representatives would have representation based on population. The slavery issue. The delegates agreed that Congress could limit future importing of slaves. They prohibited it after 1808, but they did not forbid slavery itself. The Constitution stated that persons legally held to service or labor who escaped to free states had to be returned to their owners. Under the famous 3/5 Compromise, both representation and taxation were to be based upon the number of free persons, plus 3/5 of the number of all other persons. Equality in voting. Some delegates favored suffrage for all free adult males. Some wanted to put property qualifications on the right to vote. Ultimately, they decided to leave the issue to the states. Here is a chart that shows the 3 problems just discussed and their solutions. Let's turn now and look at the economic issues. Economic issues played an important role at the convention. Advocates of the Constitution, known as Federalists, stressed the economy's weaknesses. Opponents of the Constitution, known as Anti-Federalists are those who opposed a strong national government, claimed that changes of economic weakness were exaggerated. It is not surprising that the framers of the Constitution would seek to strengthen the economic powers of the new national government, since delegates to the Constitutional Convention were the nation's post-colonial economic elite. Historian Charles Beard argued that the delegates primarily wanted these strong economic powers so that their own wealth could be protected. The best evidence does not support Beard's thesis. The Constitution clearly spelled out the economic powers of Congress. Congress was to be the chief economic policymaker. Remember, Congress holds the purse strings. Thus, Congress was granted power to tax and borrow and to appropriate funds. Congress was also granted powers to protect property rights, powers to punish counterfeiters and pirates, ensure patents and copyrights, to legislate rules for bankruptcy, and to regulate interstate and foreign commerce. The framers also prohibited practices in the states that they viewed as inhibiting economic development. State monetary systems, placing duties on imports from other states, interfering with lawfully contracted debts. States were required to respect civil judgments and contracts made in other states, and to return runaway slaves to their owners. This will be overturned by the 13th Amendment. The national government guaranteed the states a republican form of government to prevent a recurrence of Shays' Rebellion, and the new government was obligated to repay all the public debts incurred under the Continental Congress and the Articles of Confederation. This debt totaled $54 million. This chart shows the economics in the Constitution of the United States. Let's now look at the last issue of the Constitutional Convention, the individual rights issues. The delegates felt that preserving individual rights would be relatively easy. They were constructing a limited government that by design could not threaten personal freedoms. Powers were dispersed so that each branch or level of government could restrain the others. Most delegates believed that the various states were already protecting individual rights. Although the Constitution says little about personal freedoms, it does include the following. The writ of habeas corpus may not be suspended except during invasion or rebellion. Congress and the states are prohibited from passing bills of attainder, which punish people without a judicial trial, and ex post facto laws, which punish people or increase the penalties for an act that were not illegal or were not as severely punished when the act was committed. Religious qualifications may not be imposed for holding an office in national government. Treason is narrowly defined, and strict rules of evidence for conviction of treason are specified. The right to trial by jury in criminal cases is guaranteed. The Federalists believed that individual rights were protected in the Constitution. However, the Anti-Federalists believed just the opposite and pushed for more protection of individual rights. Thus the reason the Bill of Rights will be added to the Constitution, because without the Bill of Rights, the Constitution of the United States would not have been ratified. You should be able to do the following. 1. Describe the delegates to the Constitutional Convention and the core issues they shared. And 2. Categorize the issues at the Constitutional Convention and outline resolutions reached on each type of issue. Thank you for joining us for the second podcast of the Constitution. Turn in next time for the Madisonian system and ratifying the Constitution.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.